The Empire believed the stars were a ladder meant to be climbed, and once climbed meant to be ruled in its fleets. Moved with ritual certainty across mapped lanes while its councils spoke and measured. Calm about destiny, order, and the right to command. Lesser worlds, and when scouts reached the blue world, they found a people who argued loudly, traded freely, laughed often, and seemed divided into countless tribes and factions, which the Empire read as weakness, and invitation and voice arrived bearing polished language and hidden demands, and they spoke of protection, tribute, and guidance, and the blue world listened with stillness that confused the envoys. Because silence was not submission here, and when the councils of Earth replied, they did. So with stories rather than threats, speaking of weather that tore cities apart, and oceans that swallowed fleets and creatures that learned to survive despite everything, and the envoys returned unsettled, yet confident that steel would settle the matter. The Empire sought war and declared it with banners and declarations transmitted across light years, and the words were elegant and final, and the first strike targeted orbital stations. Expecting collapse and fear, yet the stations moved absorbed, rerouted and answered not with fire, but with darkness, as entire grids went quiet and Imperial sensors failed and captains reported systems behaving as if they had grown instincts. Earth did not answer the declaration with a matching speech, and no grand fleet surged forward. Instead, data streamed outward like seeds on a solar wind, and within it were designs, doctrines, and warnings written in plain language that spoke of containment and resilience and escalation control in the Empire. Dismissed these as bluffs until the border worlds began to report anomalies in a moon of glass. Dust of patrol encountered shapes that moved without engines and bent light around. Themselves and the shapes did not pursue or retreat, they waited, and when approached they unfolded into forms that resembled no ship yet carried within them swarms of machines that adapted in moments. Learning shield frequencies and harmonics, and the patrol fled, leaving behind wreckage carved with precision that felt deliberate and almost patient. The Empire called these things monsters, and the word spread because fear needs a name, and fear grew as more encounters followed, and each was different. Some were vast and slow, like migrating mountains. Others were quick and playful, darting through formations, turning volleys aside and tagging holes with marks that later blossomed into disabling blooms, and none of them spoke, and none of them chased victory on Earth. A council watched the feeds and spoke quietly of thresholds and of lessons learned the hard way long ago, and of a rule that said never bring a knife to a storm, and never bring a storm to a home. And so they sent not armies, but guardians forged from necessity and curiosity, born from a world that learned to live with disaster. One such guardian emerged near a gas giant where Imperial refineries floated, and it appeared as a ribbon of light, coiling through the clouds, feeding on radiation and pressure, and when threatened it hardened into a lattice that redirected energy back into the giant stirring currents that tore moorings loose, and the guardian drifted away, leaving the refineries intact yet unreachable, and the message was clear without words. Another appeared in a debris field, as a choir of small units that sang in pulses that scrambled targeting and induced feedback loops, and when an Imperial cruiser attempted to ram through the song, the units parted, then rejoined, sealing around the hull and freezing it in place until crews powered down and waited in silence, and later the units released the ship unharmed and vanished. The Empire escalated as empires do, and sent a hammer fleet led by admirals, whose names were etched into academies, and the fleet advanced with confidence restored by numbers and firepower, and they met a monster that had no shape at first, only a region where space behaved strangely stretching, compressing, and folding like fabric, and shots entered and did not return, and ships crossed and found themselves facing the wrong way, with time slipping in small, disorienting ways. Panic is a failure of imagination, and the admirals adapted, forming tight formations and burning through the anomaly, and for a moment it seemed to work until the anomaly learned and mirrored their formation within itself, presenting ghosts that matched every move, and the fleet slowed, confused by its own reflection, and withdrew with losses, measured not in hulls, but in certain continued to speak rarely. And when it did, the messages were simple: stop advancing, disengage, and talk. And the Empire heard only insult, believing that monsters were tools and tools could be countered, and so they developed weapons tuned to disrupt adaptive systems and launched them with ceremony. The monsters changed again because they were not tools alone, but ideas given, motion, and one became a field of mirrored facets that refracted the new weapons into harmless spectra, and another absorbed them and converted the energy into propulsion, racing along the fleet perimeter, painting ships with markers that later triggered shutdowns at the worst moments, and a third arrived as a quiet presence that dampened aggression, itself causing crews to hesitate and question orders. And in that hesitation, fleets drifted apart. A frontier world, a governor demanded proof of victory and ordered planetary batteries to fire on an approaching Guardian, and the Guardian responded by settling into the upper atmosphere, drawing storms into perfect spirals, and the storms sang with electricity that leapt between towers and melted guidance arrays. And when the storms passed, the cities stood, and the batteries were silent, and the people looked up and felt both terror and relief. Empire began to fracture internally as merchants complained of frozen trade, and soldiers spoke of enemies that refused to kill, and priests argued whether restraint was cruelty or mercy. And into this noise, Earth sent a single delegation aboard, a modest vessel with no escorts and no weapons visible, and the Empire debated whether to destroy it. And in the end, curiosity won. Delegation spoke of boundaries and of a truth learned on a dangerous world that survival favors those who adapt together, and they explained that the monsters were guardians, designed to end wars by making them unwinnable and boring, and that if pressed further, Earth could send worse, not by cruelty, but by consequence. And the Empire listened because its admirals had no counters, and its people were tired. Negotiations followed, and borders were redrawn, and the monsters withdrew, gradually lingering just long enough to ensure compliance, and as they left, they shed fragments that turned into monitoring stations. And the Empire rebuilt under new rules that favored exchange over conquest, and the word monster slowly changed meaning, becoming a reminder that fear often mistakes protection for threaten. Earth's children learned stories of the quiet war and asked why the monsters did not finish the enemy, and elders answered that victory measured in endings is a poor measure, and that the greatest strength is to stop before becoming what you fear. And the stars remained wide, and the lesson traveled farther than any fleet, and in time the Empire taught it too.